welcome to the Columbus podcast. Today we're going to focus on the fashion industry and especially the trends when it comes to circularity. So to begin with, we're going to talk about the news in this space, what's going to happen, what is happening, what do we know about, for example, the new DPP regulations. Secondly, we will get to the toolbox. So what do we need to get in place to be able to enable this from a process and tooling and platform point of view. And third, we will raise the discussion a little bit into the innovative space. So what does innovation entail here and how do we achieve that? With me here today, I have Espen Enger from Columbus, Norway. We also have Helene Bjerrefeldt, the Infor expert in fashion retail. And my name is Henrik Leffler. I work as a digital advisor in Columbus, in Sweden. So, going into the topic of today's discussion, what's new? What's happening? What have we heard? The DPP has been going on. There's a lot of new regulations going on. There's a lot of requirements when it comes to reporting and so on. And we know all of that. But what's happening right now? What's the latest? I believe there was a report issued lately, right? Espen, do you want to talk about it?
Yes, that's right, Henrik. We have a kind of new report from EU. They have tried to describe what do we actually need to fill in this digital product passport. And from my point of view, I think this is very good because so far it's a lot of thoughts and that kind of stuff, and it's not concrete. But today we have something to work further with. Are you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And this report was very good because it explained in detail, people are quite scared about this thing. I think digital product passport, what does it mean? I'm going to be ready by, I think it was 2024 first, but it has been postponed. But here we get kind of a blueprint, I would call it. It's not that, much, but in 2027, we're thinking about more simplified or minimized version. So it's kind of a step-by-step approach. So the guideline is telling you exactly what key topics you need to focus on in the first step. So it's not everything. It's a step-by-step that everybody can take this step, more or less.
So I think it would be fair to say that I think the European Union, they have their Green Deal, right? So there's a lot of things going to happen. They want to push the envelope of where the European Union as a complete community is taking this, right? But I think they also recognize that this is going to be extremely difficult. So as you say, I think they've postponed the time scale a bit. And we're now also starting to see more concrete suggestions of exactly how this is going to be implemented, because it's going to be a huge deal for basically any company that produces or sells or imports anything inside of the European Union. There's going to be the simplified DPP, for example. So what does that entail? What does that mean in concrete terms?
Yeah, we know roughly there's been a lot of talk, like you said. But here we know it's going to be related to the product, obviously, and a lot of information around the product. It's like a passport. So in effect, you should be able to, when you buy something, you should get a lot of information. But it was not 100% clear what does that mean, what kind of information. But if we look at composition details, is the material recyclable? Can you recycle it further when you want to get rid of it? And plastics and chemicals and dangerous products that you might be using. But also that means you need to collect the data from production. But it's not overwhelming, I would say. Quite a lot of this data we have already today. Would you agree? I mean, like where the product is born in a PLM system, I think that's kind of the core. You start to define the product.
I agree. And actually, I think they respect all the actors in this value chain. They understand that this is quite complex, and therefore they have made 3 steps to implement this digital product passport. And this is the first one. And it should be quite easy to do this for most of the companies. And I think that's a good way to educate themselves to go into this and learn for the next steps, so to speak.
So one thing, I think it's a good time to really just highlight this. So this is what it looks like. The report we're talking about is a digital product passport in the textile sector, and there was a draft version released on 14th of March of this year. So this is the kind of reporting and this is the kind of guidelines that we're going to see. And I think we're going to see more of this. But as you say, I mean, some of the really interesting things is that, you know, if I as a consumer buy a shirt, do I actually need to know where a particular button is produced? Or because what we've heard is that it sounds reasonable that there will be a kind of increasing percentage of what kind of information you will need to know. This is what I've heard from the Swedish Chamber of Commerce and the Danish Chamber of Commerce, for example, in discussions we've had. And this is still open for discussion, if I understand correctly, exactly what the tier 3 is, for example, and when are we going to have that as a requirement when it comes to this. So did you guys see anything touching on that in the latest materials and reports coming out?
Yes, but not in first place. I think that will be in the first place, the third act to go into this. And I think that will be in 2033, which is the plan. So before that, I think actually the most companies have the information in their already existing IT architecture, the ERP system, PLM system, and so on. But of course, they need to do a kind of analysis on the data and preparing for this. Understand what kind of information they are in need and where do they find it, this information in their applications.
But now we talk about the product passport. But just to clarify, there are things coming sooner. You know, the ESG reporting, which is more about the carbon footprint, I would say, the transportation, still requires you to have that data, you know, through across the value chain. So we talk about tier 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is, I mean, that's challenging in itself, and that the reporting is coming very fast.
Yeah, and also means that the companies that work together, the transportation industry will need to provide data on CO2, for example, when it comes to deliveries and shipping in both outbound and inbound from a warehouse, if you happen to be a fashion retailer, for example, right? So, okay, right, so let's talk about the problems going in here. So, for example, I think one of the really interesting aspects here is about the actual business models. What are we trying to achieve here? I mean, it's quite clear that the European Union is really trying to push the industry forward, but it's also quite clear that this is very much about consumer behavior and what the consumers desire and want. And I think the second-hand market, for example, it's hard to imagine how instead of, you know, buying 5,000 blue t-shirts from China, you will have one blue t-shirt from Eric who sold it back, and then you need to verify the quality of it to be able to sell it. So this to me is one of the really interesting things to see. But then again, we're seeing the consumer behavior is changing perhaps quickly with TikTok and things like that. And one of these days we just might see this shift. So have you seen any examples of companies who are really getting ready for this, and what are they doing?
Yeah. I think I have to say in the first place that in this report, they have made a kind of analysis regarding the trends in the fashion industry. And what they expect actually is that in 2028, there will be more selling second-hand products than fast fashion. And if that's right, there will be a huge changes in this business. And I think, of course, all that are part of this business, they have to think and prepare for this. Understand what mean it for me, these changes.
You know, so maybe it's not a surprise. You talk about fast fashion. You know, H&M has been quite fast. They have done several things. They bought Sellpy. They also went into the rewear, where they are selling secondhand, and now also renting. One of the stores here in Stockholm, they actually renting out or trying to rent out with a new concept. So I think it all comes, it's a secondhand, but it comes to the topic of circularity. So keeping products longer in the life cycle. So there are many initiatives that you could look at, but are we making money on it today? I mean, it's new. So it's a struggle to get it to work, but I think it's fair to say changes are coming. Yes. I mean, and you have to start thinking about where will I be in a couple of years ahead.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also that a lot of companies try. For instance, there is one company out there that trying to, you can subscribe on apparels, 6 apparels for each month, and then you can leave them to the company and you get 6 new. And I think they try to find some kind of substitute regarding fast fashion, but not always produce new things.
It sounds
it's very
great,
interesting,
yeah.
But does you make money? You have to see.
Yeah, we heard from one client actually, there is a challenge of bringing back the products because you have to quality assurance, you have to test them, you have to clean them maybe. So it's not that easy, it sounds easy, but
yeah, that's extremely tricky, and also to make it very efficient as a process, because otherwise there is no margin, right? Personally, I find it quite heartening though that I found a report, because I was trying to find numbers on, so where are we on this? And I found a report, the circularity gap, and it says that in Sweden, 3.4% of basically the resources we utilize are circular. So that basically gives us a gap of 96.6%, which could be, so I mean, if we're talking about a rental and all of these things, and that's as a total 3.4%, if that doubles, it's still very small. So that actually means that the potential market here for these things is big if the consumer behavior changes, right? And I think that's something we want to come back to a little bit later when we talk about enablement and when we talk about what the future can bring. I think it's really important to be ready to act on that market opportunity when it does arrive. So I think right now we're maybe in a space where there are some companies that are really pushing the envelope ahead, and the rest of the industry is perhaps not really doing anything, and then there's part of the industry that is waiting. I think enabling the readiness to be innovative is really key going forward. So, any reflections on that?
no, but I think overall, one thing to think about, we talked about this report, it says European, yeah? What happens in Europe overall? Because, I mean, we think about the local market here, Sweden, maybe Norway and so on, Denmark, Finland, but what goes on in Europe? Is everybody agreeing upon the rules, the legislations, the requirements needed? There might be a difference. If you have very high requirements on yourself and your production chain, maybe your prices goes up because you have to collect this data. But other countries don't have the same type of legislation, so the prices could go lower. So, I mean, we don't know where we will end up on that, how Europe overall will consolidate on this topic.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting topic as well. And at the end of the day, that could even drive inflation. So we're not here to talk about economics, but if the purpose of this legislation is to remove the lemons, so to speak, from this market, that will actually drive the prices up, and that's something we would expect to see. And then again, coming back to the consumer behavior, we will need to see if that's something that people will respond to or acquiesce, or will people buy wardrobes that change to more quality, reduce the number of outfits you buy that you do not use, etc. So this is really a landslide change in this industry, I would say.
I think I just have to add to what you say. Consolidation overall is a natural behavior in economics. When things happen, there might be a consolidation of number of suppliers. Smaller companies might be out of business or find new ways of collaborating with larger companies. So I think we can see a lot happening going forward.
Yeah. Or with the large companies simply buying smaller companies. And that I think is really interesting when it comes to this legislation. If the legislation is such that a small company will have a problem fulfilling it, we will probably see a lot of larger companies buying smaller companies because they are the only ones that can manage it. So I am hopeful that, and I think we see that here, that the European Union is actually pushing to try to help to get through this. And I also expect to see more potential partners for companies to get support here in this space. And I think, Espen, you've seen some examples of that, right? With companies that provide tagging and database services and so on.
And we have this non-profit company called GSO. They have made a new standard. They are responsible for the barcode and the QR code and maintenance, that kind of standards. And they have made a new standard now, calling Digital Link, which make it possible to have one unique ID for this apparel. And that's necessary if you shall use this traceability and all that kind of stuff that you need to cover this kind of requirements. So this Digital Link content more information than the traditional QR code, and it's also possible to give different access to different kind of information. So it's a huge opportunity to cover this need and the future that you not are possible to do today with these traditional standards.
It requires a lot of data.
Yes, a lot of
To
data.
be stored, yeah.
And actually, it's requiring that you have a unique ID, and this is the standard for this.
That's interesting, yeah. It's going along the route of food.
Yeah.
Food has had that requirement for a long time.
Yeah, fashion is food is one of the metaphors. I very much like to talk about metaphors whenever we talk about IT, and I think fashion is food is
Fashion
one of those.
follows the footstep of food.
Yeah, where you have the traceability, if you, like you mentioned for meat before, right?
It has, for a long time, if you look back, you can go and buy a dish, salmon, for example. In a way, you can trace it all the way back to where the fish was grown up, and even what feeding you were giving it. But overall, having that traceability from the start to the finish, that's quite natural today in food. Fashion, not really. I think personally, we need legislation, unfortunately. That's what happened to the food industry. When there was a legislation, it started to move in that direction. So maybe fashion is the same.
Yeah. And I agree, and I think that's what's interesting, because this means that everybody at least has the same regulation in the entire European Union. In the entire internal market, you have the same rules and regulations enforced in the same way. So hopefully we will see something like GDPR, where actually everybody has exactly the same rules to comply against. All right, well, it's also a very diverse industry, right? And I personally also find it very interesting to talk about this from the tricky point of view that if your average product price is 150 euros, it would be much easier to create a valid business model out of repairing it. But if your average product cost is far lower, 15 euros or something like that, this will be much trickier, because then you really need super efficient processes behind to be able to enable these things. So, but we have some really good examples.
But I think we have to be humble to see that different companies on the market, like you explained. But if you take one example, the premium brands, it's not a surprise. Denim, take jeans. It's known for consuming a lot of water, and they were really Levi, Nudie jeans very early on to do sustainability, reporting stuff, traceability, but also repair. And such initiatives, because these products are a little bit more expensive than fast fashion. But fast fashion, on the other hand, maybe they are not repairing, but they are being quite fast, I should say H&M again, to recycle. You can go back with your clothing to the store and they give you a little extra money for that, but they take care of that product and can use it further.
Yeah. And I think it's also quite one of the companies that we worked with here in Sweden is Kappahl, big fashion retailer, obviously. And I think if you look at what they have been doing, they are looking very much at the efficiency in the compliance area, and what I personally like to talk about, the defensive part of ESG reporting. So how can you be efficient in reporting things? How can you be efficient in providing the data and quality ascertained data, to make that very simple? The second part they talk about is to really drive the area forward. They're doing a lot of testing, like you say, with H&M. Kappahl is doing the same when it comes to second-hand selling, when it comes to refurbishment, remaking things into new things, and so on. And the third part is really the technology enablers. So I think it's going to be quite important to enable new technology, like perhaps RFID tagging, to be able to track individuals and that sort of thing, just to be ready to jump at the opportunity when it arrives and you actually decide, and we know exactly what you're going to do with it. And I also find it quite interesting that they look at this regulation, the transparency and traceability that is required, that also empowers the consumer. So if you're a leader in this space, it can be something that really drives consumer value, right? So with that, let's move on a little bit and talk about the nitty-gritty. Perhaps that's obvious, but we're not really in the business of fashion retail. We're in the business of making efficient processes, establishing platforms, enabling innovation. So what do we actually see with our clients? Where are they working? Where are they putting in the effort right now? I think Helene, you had some examples to start, perhaps.
Yes, I mean they do a lot of stuff today, but if we look on this area of circularity, where we know some companies are struggling to get up and running, but children's wear or children's product, I should say, it's quite a natural area to start with because children grow, and you buy clothing or something, keep it for 1 or 2 months and get rid of it. It's not sustainable. So we see renting or subscription services are coming into that area, and some customers already are doing that or thinking about it. So subscribing, renting things out, the product comes back, but you have to then quality check, clean it, and reuse it again. So it's kind of the second-hand market we are talking about, even though we're talking about rental. That's one area. Do you have maybe an example of?
Yes, we have one request in Norway actually regarding kids in kindergarten. You can do a kind of subscription regarding boots and outdoor clothes for the kids, and I think it's very exciting. And I will try to realize these kind of business processes.
And that is the renting. I think that's it's a difficult area for many companies to start off with. It depends on your price level. But other areas are repair. We see some clients already today that you can bring in the products to them, they can repair for free sometimes, and by that you also keep your products longer.
And I think actually there will be a lot of new kind of cooperation regarding this. Repair experts, cleaning expert, cooperation with the fashion industry more than they are doing today.
Yeah, it's kind of a value-added service in a way, whether you're renting, repairing, or you can have a cleaning service or whatever kind of service. But it's kind of looking at the service around the product, than just focus on the product. That you just come up with new products all the time, you sell it, and that's it. But this is more services aligned to the product.
Yeah. One reflection I have is around optimization of processes, because that's really the business that we are all in, right? It's to look at how does the supply chain process look like, how does the finance process look like, how does the accounts receivable process look like, and I think it's kind of time to involve these processes more. Something we see in the sports retail space, so we work with XXL and Stadium here in Sweden, for example, is that one of the examples in that area is optimizing returns. So, and when you're optimizing returns, to also involve the consumer in that. So how do you involve the consumer in preparing the return in a way so you can receive it efficiently? And for example, using RFID tagging to know which specific outfit, which specific style and size is it that you are receiving. So you basically make sure that the back office process here is actually really efficient to be ready to do this, because otherwise it will be like the early aughts internet retailers, like, who simply couldn't handle returns, and that tipped that entire business model. And I think that's one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of work going on right now to really, really optimize return processes. And also, not least, tie that to the kind of digital commerce experience. And another thing we see from that point of view is to really have the same customer experience. Regardless if you're buying something new, if you're buying something used, if you're renting it, you have the same customer experience, you have the same exposure to the products. This is going to be very challenging in many ways, but to really look at it from that point of view and try to align it and work on that. And I think doing that early enough is going to enable us, or enable our clients, to be able for the shift when it does come. And in the meantime, you still get a lot out of having efficient return processes anyway, regardless of circularity, right? So
yeah, I echo what you say on the returns. I think one client is actually taking it one step further. They are checking the return. Does it make sense to return it overall? So carbon footprint, transactions going back and forth. Maybe they say, just keep the product, we send you a new one. Intelligent returns. Yeah, so smart returns.
do you think that will even be allowed going forward though? I mean, if we are even limiting how much we're not allowed to throw garments out anymore, I mean, will it even be allowed not to receive a return? Will you be forced to receive it, do you think?
That's a good question.
No, I think If so, then we are required to handle it in a circularity way, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. But I have to tell about an idea for 8 years ago in Norway, a company called Sizer. Because of this issue, you buy 3 or 4 clothes, the same clothes, with different sizes, and take them home and buy the one that fit you, and send them on the back. And that's an expensive process. The carbon footprint is high, and actually in the fashion industry globally, the returns more than $400 billion a year. 25% of this amount of clothes are waste, and if we are able to take this kind of services into us, we will reduce the carbon footprint, we will reduce the waste, and I think that's very, very sustainability. And it's a very interesting services that I think these companies in fashion should take into their accounts.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, we see that quite a lot with the customers we work with. We talk about the extended product life cycle. So not just know where the product is born with typically a PLM system. You classify it, you have a lot of information, composition, all of that thing. And then you produce it, so you can get all of that data, but also what happens after. So the extended product life cycle. So there are companies now on the market who do that kind of catching up of data. Do you repair it? Do you rent it? But it all requires a lot of data. I think that's what I hear from customers a lot. Where should I start? They know where they need to go, where they think they need to go. So they need guidance as well. It's kind of a change management in a way to know where should I start.
Yeah.
So I see people thinking a lot of PLM at the moment, where the product is born, because it's a natural point to gather this data we read about in the report.
Yeah.
But it's much more than that. We also need the supply chain that you talked about, getting the data from production where we are not involved, because maybe I'm not producing my own garments, I outsource, so how can I get that data? So it's a lot of questions at the moment.
And to latch on to that, we're looking more and more at the need for a structured data setup, and I think it also ties a little bit perhaps later into what we might call composable ERP or composable commercial platforms as well, where basically all the transactions, everything we do is tied to the same database, which means that we have the ability to provide reporting, we can tie the transactions we do to the traceability of those products, and we can pick and choose a little bit how we report it, and then that will enable automation. But we cannot automate if we're not on top of and have a structured data, clean data, which with quality, which is typically a problem we've seen a lot. So a tangent actually is that I think this is one of the killer apps potentially for generative AI to help us clean and structure data and make sure it is useful to do this, because you cannot enable machine learning models or this kind of more advanced data models unless you have a structured data model underneath, right?
I think we hear that a lot when we ask customers, what would be your example of generative AI scenarios to find abnormalities, things that doesn't match up, to find that data inaccuracy. So we want to go to the accuracy of data. I think you're right. The automation can help there a lot.
Yeah, and of course this is a huge task. Our data and AI department has created a lot of solutions here around ESG reporting, ESG reporting strategy, and how to get this data under control. So I will not pretend to be an expert in that space, so I will not delve further into that. But it's a really interesting space to look at, because the data will enable these efficiencies going forward and will enable the capability of doing this. And I think the other part of it, which is also really interesting, is how the modern, more cloud-oriented systems can help us stay up to date and enable innovation and decrease threshold for when we can do things. And again, as composable ERP provides us the ability to work around one data platform, it also enables new business models quicker.
Yeah.
And I think that's really key. So it's one thing for a company that is considering moving to a cloud or SaaS ERP, but also I see a lot of companies that have cloud or SaaS ERPs that don't really leverage what you can really do with it. So that's a really interesting topic as well, because it will lead us into the next discussion, which is innovation, because the more you can lower the threshold to enable innovation, like we're using low code, like using ready-made machine learning models that may be available and so on, that is you need to practice using the toolbox, right, to be able to utilize it going forward. And that will take time. So I think it may be a call to action here for all of you listening to really go out there and play with the tools you already have and think about what they can do. So then when the time comes, we can leverage it, right?
Yeah, I think it's what you mentioned earlier, maybe you can explore, but so where should a company start? Because look at what you already have today and build a strategy. If you know where you're going and you look at, you can do that already today. You can investigate, what do I have today?
Yeah.
What's the
and
gap?
from my point of view, actually, this is something we have done a lot before. Continuous business improvements. It's changing all time around us, and they have to follow up these changes, requirements, and that kind of stuff, and try to be prepared for the future. And this continuous business improvements is be curious, look at opportunities regarding these changes, and take it into account before and make it possible to have these processes and the data platform that make it possible. Quite important.
Yeah, and I think that cooperation is also quite interesting, right? And that ties into integrations, for example, which is also an important part of a modern way of working, modern platforms to actually have, because I think we're going to see more of ecosystems around companies. We're going to see ecosystems in the B2B space, in the business and consumer space, in the production and offshore space as well, where we're going to see the companies that are most forward-looking when it comes to enable integrations to the ecosystem that they are acting in to be potentially more successful. And that's also a really interesting point, I think, going to the last and final part of this conversation, I think, to look at the cooperation between these companies and the amount of power that you can see. I would think it's a really interesting challenge to see how the suppliers who comply to the EU regulations and can basically not only offer you a product, but can also offer you immediately all the data you will need to be compliant with the DPP, for example, they will have a tremendous advantage in the marketplace over time. So how do we kind of make sure they don't empower us if we are in the retailer space, if we are in the fashion space? This is something which is going to be really, really interesting going forward, I think, to see how can we make that ecosystem as big as possible while ascertaining a kind of clean sourcing environment, right, where we can place things.
I think there are signs already, or when you listen to companies, that they think of, say, a quality before quantity. So reducing number of suppliers, making sure that the key ones you really work with, you can bond or build a better relationship closer, because you know that you can get the data you need, you get quality data, and less suppliers. That's what I hear a lot. Key focus suppliers. So we might see other suppliers struggling a lot that are not able to share this data.
Of course, it's quite difficult because it's all about trust. And there's always someone out there that you actually can't trust. But still, it's all about the consumers. If this kind of requirement from EU make us to have focus on quality, have focus on sustainability, and we do not buy products that do not have all this information available from me as a consumer, then of course the companies making business in this will change. So that's the main thing, I think, regarding this approach. We have to change is the target you have in that.
And I think as a final note on that, I mean, we talked about consumers pushing this and governments, but I would also say there are researches done, like Sustainable Brand Index in Sweden, SBI. They come up with a report. They are measuring companies, how sustainable they are, right or wrong, but you really, as a company, I would like to be in charge of, the way I promote myself on the market. I need to be the pilot, not relying upon a report coming out and is telling X, Y, Z. I think that is you have to be the owner of this going forward, because these things happen. The market is pushing, consumers are pushing, analysts are rating you. So you need to make sure you share your product's journey. That's what I'm saying.
And the day that it becomes trendy on TikTok to buy used things, you want to be able to utilize that market, right? And if 96.6% of the current market is not circular, it's a huge space to grow into, of course. So, yeah.
If you are not sharing your story, someone else will. What I mean by that is, we all know it's a high focus on products. If you're sustainable, there's a lot of stuff going on. If you don't take control of that data and you decide, this is how I want to, it's brand protection. This is how I want to promote my brand. This is the data I want to share. Because if you don't do that, it sounds simple, but if you don't do that, if you just wait, someone else will maybe share a story around your product, and you don't want that to happen because you don't know if it's accurate or not. So you want to be in control. So if you're not sharing your story, someone else will. So take action.
And that also ties into being in control of your data.
Yes.
And cleaning your data. I mean, quality data. Yeah. Another interesting aspect I would also argue is that I think it's almost a little bit of an old truth that this kind of disconnect of creating a separate part of the company or a separate entity of the company to enable innovation has been frowned upon in later years. But I think this is an area where that kind of makes sense to kind of enable the kind of greenhouse approach to where you can explore these business models and empower the people who work with this specifically to create this and to create the foundations for actually exploring these business models and to do that as simply as possible. All right, so to wrap up the discussion, any final comments, words, any call to actions?
I think you have to be curious. You have to read this report, understand what is it following me regarding the future. Do not sitting behind and just wait and hope this is going away. Be curious and learn the things. I think that's important.
For me, I would say I agree fully. And maybe take stock, look at what you already have today. I think number one, set a strategy. Where do you want to be? And where are you today? And measure how am I going to get there? What are the steps I need to take? What do I need to be able to measure to be where I want to be in a couple of years? I think that's for me would be start with the strategy and look at where you are today.
Something I would like to tie back to, if I may, also is the nature of innovation. I think innovation comes from a space of ease and invitation. So I think it's easy to not make this big and complicated, but to just try it out, experiment, try things, see if there are particular areas or something you can give it a go and try it so you learn how this works, right? That would be my call to action to you listening. So with that, a little wrap from us here in a beautiful Stockholm, just 26 degrees warm today, so looking forward to some iced coffee. Thank you, Espen, very much for today. Thank you, Helene, for coming and joining us. So thank you from us at Columbus and Infor. Thank you, and good night.